Bonjour.
Good morning, welcome. Welcome to all of you, all quite in a large number, and you're starting with the day with a fascinating question. Did the crisis change politics? This is the topic of the discussion. And of course, by asking the question, we mean we have to question 1 year and a half of virus, confinement, whatever the cost, healthcare, emergency situation, and changes. Are they sustainable, durable? 5 panelists, very high quality as usual, to answer the question. And they're very different views, and I would like to welcome the woman on the stage. Hello, of the workers. She's Secretary General of the International Syndicates, because she talks to us from Australia. Hello, good afternoon, Mrs. Sharon. Hello, Sharon Burrow. Hello.
With us this morning for us, this afternoon for you. Thank you so much.
The world of business is with us. I have with me the CEO of ADP, Augustin de Romanet. Good morning. The Secretary of the Italian Democratic Party, center left, in Italy, Enrico Letta. You were also a member of the President of the Council. And he's also a candidate to the, he's just been re-elected at the head of the region, the President of Hauts-de-France, Xavier Bertrand. And finally, the Director of the Opinion and Business Managers Department, Jérôme Forquet. 50 minutes to come. Each member of the panel will have 5-6 minutes to take the floor. After that, there will be a Q&A session between our discussion between the members of the panel, and then questions from the audience. Then the Vice President of the Cercle des Économistes, Christian de Boissier, opened the scope of reflection. Yes, good morning. It is a broad topic, and I would like to open 4 leads or 4 avenues to somewhat oriented the discussion. First, when we talk about the crisis, we mainly talk about the pandemics, even though I do believe that 2008 did prepare the field. The crisis means, in terms of politics or policies, that is the increase of what we call the non-conventional policies. That was the case in 2007, since 2007 in monetary policies. What's new with the COVID is the budgetary and fiscal non-conventional policies. And I would like to really pay homage. We don't discuss that, but very few people actually do criticize the whatever the cost when we try to think, ink and noon. So how do we get out of this? That's the real discussion, and how, in which conditions. So I do believe that the rise of non-conventional in budgetary and fiscal aspects and in the monetary dimension since 2007 raises 2 questions. First, I do believe that the 3% deficit, public deficit standard, and 60 for the debt are dead, gone. We will have to rebuild something else. And this is an open field. I don't know when we will do it. Will there be an easy agreement among the 27 member states, not to mention the 19 of the Eurozone? That's going to be a topic. Second topic on the non-conventional is, of course, the issue of debts. And I do insist on that fact, and not enough people work on that, on the observation that today, when we talk about sustainability, we have to talk about the global debt. Public debt is important. The private debt is important too. So our coming out of the crisis, sustainability will concern both public and private debts. And one of the discussion in the budgetary and financial articulation will be, and the sort of a next pulling, coming out of this scenario, restart inflation that would make the public and private debt sustainable. I'm not saying that we need inflation. All I'm saying, I'm setting the forecasting problems. To me, this is one of the first big topic of relationship between crisis and politics. Second topic, better known, is the return of industrial policies. Well, what strikes me in the discussion, the return of the states, well, it never left in France, we talk about the return of states, but what strikes me on COVID crisis and industrial strategies, well, in fact, there are two types of questions. First, the first comment is that when we talk about industrial strategies, it has to do today with 90% of the GDP, not 10 or 12. Percent, and the industrial approach should deal with services, and agro-food industry, and so on and so forth. So a large part of production. And the second topic, which is still open, is at which level should we set the level of return to the industrial strategies? On many topics, Europe should use scale effects. Your minus 30 seconds. And third topic, better known, is that the crisis means attention given to three issues: ecology, inequalities, and proximity. And I'd like that in the panel, and I know that you all competent around the table to do so, we should move from words to action or things. On proximity, someone should tell us something interesting on what development policy in the coming year behind this. One phrase, well, the return of trust, and I think the central discussion is how can we restore confidence and trust? It's the key question. Thank you. Now, did the crisis change policies? Enrico Letta, for 6 years you headed the Sciences Po International School, and you crossed the Alps to return to politics. Now, do you have a feeling that you are back into an old world with the same issues, the same problems, the same solutions, the same political games, or did the crisis change politics? First of all, thank you for this invitation. It's a great pleasure to be with you again. Yes, I went back to Italian policy because my country asked me to come back and to help at the time of reconstruction of the country. So I'm very happy to do so. The lessons I drew from the changes I have experienced after 7 years, well, it's as follows. First, there were dusty words all of a sudden became young. Europe, proximity, as Christian just said, state. Those were almost obsolete words, and now they've all of a sudden freshened up. We'll see what it's going to give, but they are central into the discussion. Second point, the issue of digital. The digital has completely changed things. I've seen the difference. I was here 10 years ago. Social networks were just like emerging. Today, it's a drastic change, total change. So I'm expressing my personal experience. Today, a politician may have absolutely no idea, no vision, but all he has to do is to react to what goes on every day on the social networks, every morning, every afternoon. You just have to react, and you become the star in of politics, and you have nothing to say. You're just reacting to what's going on. So the real issue today is how, in this wave of tsunami of information, of flowing information, how do you keep your vision and you're able to say things and to show an orientation, a direction? I think, to me, this is the more complicated things for whoever is in politics, and results count, as Christian just said. Third point has to do with the key question, as Christian said, that is to say, within the coming years, there are a couple of challenges that will be essential to define the role of politicians in the future. First, what European rules will we have? We had rules for 15 years. We were somewhat of a disaster. Didn't work. Then we changed the rules because we removed them because of the pandemics. And today we have to, in the next 2 years, we have to define what will be the rules of the future. This will be the main debate, and this is a debate where France and Italy together should play a key role. And it's not they should play together, not against one another. And we need to convince the other. The other main question is how can we make sure that the basic idea of next generation EU should become permanent? And this is the key topic, because next generation EU means to have the ability to double the European budget with new incomes, possible of loan borrowing, high tech, the GAFA taxes and so on and so forth. So how can we make sure it will work? Well, 3 countries, Italy, Spain, and France, those are the 3 beneficiaries of the next generation EU, which have to demonstrate that it is useful and we can spend the money, which is the, which is the prime to convince the frugal European countries to convince them that these mechanisms will work for the future. And let me close on this. The issue of sustainability is the real issue. And the sustainability issue has to do with transition. How can we make sure that people are convinced that these steps have to be made, bearing in mind that it is essential for our future, but making sure that the inequalities which today are the deep fracture in our society give the possibility to those who have less to say, well, today I have a problem, I can't deal with I can't deal with problems in 20 years. I want to deal with the problem now. So this is the role of politicians, to deal with this transition and back to proximity. And clearly things that we say have to be possibilities, to be realities. And I saw that many students, I would like to welcome them. And they're the center of our discussion. Youth has been, the youth has been pushed aside during the pandemic. So, politicians have one mission, is to take the youth, which have been pushed aside. They've made sacrifices to save the old generation, and the youth which stayed home saved thousands of lives of elderly people. And today, our society has to give back to the young ones something we took during the lockdown. So, a policy that would understand. Politicians who understand what is changing would put the young people at the center today. Perfect transition. Sharon Barrow, hello. Politics and the young people. Politics and the youth. What's your... And I think translation is there. Mrs. Barrow. Now, pandemics did impact the world of labor, including the young, especially the young and the women. What would be the political response for you today? Do you have a feeling that it is up to the challenge for what is going to come?
So the pandemic exposed a broken labor market, and it's fueled anger, despair, and mistrust. So if you've deepened the mistrust in your democracies, such to the point in many countries that they're at risk, then politics and political priorities must change. So of course, crises and pandemics change politics. But I would say in this case, the lessons that existed before the pandemic of historical levels of inequality, the climate crisis, and the slowness to act simply exhibit an exceptional circumstance. And then you actually add the pandemic on top of that, and it does express failure in too many of our political leaders. So the consequences are serious. We have historic levels, as I said, of inequality. People feel they're the victims of an economic model with deep income inequity, plus, of course, continued exclusion of women, migrants, young people, and groups don't have the confidence in secure futures. So if you don't feel secure, you're not going to feel secure in your democracy. And we see it, the explosion of racism and xenophobia that's driven by fear, harnessed, of course, by the rise of the far right. Fascism is alive and well in many forms, even within our democracies. It has a different face to that of the last century. And of course, it's globally interconnected, which means it's that much more difficult to subsume. So there can be no peace and democracy in denial of freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. And we know amongst our own ITUC family, the workers of the world, that we have people being killed and incarcerated in too many nations: Myanmar, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Colombia, Honduras, Guatemala, Palestine, Sudan, Zimbabwe, Turkey, and so many more, for simply defending the values and the civic space necessary to fight for inclusive democracies. So political parties have to listen, they have to take responsibility for the people that they serve. This requires for workers a new social contract. It requires global action for inclusive democracy, and that means multilateral reform. We describe this as needing a new social contract as a basis for recovery and resilience. And indeed, you know, when you look back prior to the 8-9 crisis and through to now, you see a trend where business as usual in our political leaders has still dominated. So we would say today that we are facing a risk to our common security, but it's threatened not just by weapons of war, and including the spectre of renewal of nuclear weapons, even in Europe, but also by the breakdown of the social contract and the disregard of human and labour rights, along with the destruction of the environment. All of these are destroying confidence and trust in the promise of a just future. And so we say that if you look at our Global Rights Index that we just released this week, it'll give you the picture that I'm talking about. 74% of countries constrained the right to freedom of association. That's the heart of democratic politics, as well as the heart of trade unionism and any other group seeking democratic rights and freedoms. 79% impeded the right to bargain collectively, 87% the right to strike, and the right to justice shrunk in 65% of countries, with actually civic space being constrained in 43%. So if you think about that and see the increase in arrests and detentions in 97 countries for human rights or labour rights or environmental rights defenders, then we need, for peace and stability, a new social contract. And this is for business as well as people, because businesses can't be stable or sustainable in broken communities. So last year we did establish the call for a new social contract. It has 5 key demands: jobs, climate-friendly jobs with just transition; rights, the promise of the ILO Centenary Declaration, with rights and protections for all workers, irrespective of the employment arrangement, because most of our world is now either informal, 60% of workers working without any formal guarantee of rights, minimum wages, social justice, rule of law, and in the 40% of formal employed workers, more than a third are now actually insecure. And that means the explosion of our platform businesses as well.
Mrs. Barrow,
and then, of course, we have to end corporate impunity.
Could you please conclude?
Just one
so much.
30
Thank
seconds.
you.
So we have to end corporate impunity with mandated due justice. We have to actually look at universal social protection, equality of incomes, gender and race, and inclusion, which means the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. The recipes are there. Along with industry policy and investment in jobs, we can repair our broken societies, but not if the politics doesn't change.
Merci. Réparer les sociétés.
Thank you, madam. So this is a call for action from politicians. Well, there is one sitting next to me, Xavier Bertrand. Did the crisis change politics? I read the echoes and some consider that the solutions you're bringing have changed. You're not presenting the same. This is interesting. Did your convictions, the solutions you propose, did they change with the crisis?
Yes, but not only with the crisis of this pandemic. To be perfectly frank with you, when I offered my own system, I wasn't particularly awake. I thought politics was in crisis, but we haven't yet found all of the answers to that. And then after that, after I thought a little bit, I said to myself, the question we really need to address is, can politics impact the crisis? Because that is what is at stake here for the coming years. But I'm going to try and keep within the tracks. I'm going to follow the guidelines. So has the crisis changed politics? Not yet. When we take a good look at things, we can say that in the United States, the crisis has changed politics. However, we have to recognize that in many European countries, including in France, this is not yet the case. And today I see how we are stepping over these regional elections we've just had here in France, and that shows that we are not taking into account what has been said. The abstention levels have been very, very high. Abstention levels are not what we've experienced in the past. Abstention levels were a political message as we've never heard before. And so if we believe that we can continue exactly as we did in the past, well, we can do that, but knowing that the extremes are rising to the surface again, no, we will be facing a sudden wake-up call. So politics has to take into account that there's a huge challenge. Christian mentioned this earlier on. If we hope to keep our independence and our sovereignty, this is a question of restoring public finance. The second aspect is the challenge of restoring industrial sovereignty, technological sovereignty also, and there are two other aspects which are essential, which Christian mentioned in his introduction. First of all, we have to have a new political project, a new way of organizing our country, because as we have seen, centralism is a corpse that is weighing us down. Mr. Fourquet is going to talk about his surveys later on, but local actors are really important protagonists, not only local elected representatives. The state needs to be shaken up. We need the state, but we have to organize it in a different way. And we have to get back to identifying what the role of a central state is. How do we perform our responsibilities? And we need to get back to a republic of territories, and that corresponds to a new way of organising the country and society. And I'm absolutely convinced that the only way that we'll be able to breathe, and a final point, which is a macroeconomic dimension, very, very important. Let's not forget the men and women in this country. These are the most important elements in future politics. And things that we have learned from the crisis include that we had that front line, the healthcare workers who were outstanding, but there were all the others as well. The second line of workers, those who are working without masks, who could not work from home, the deliverers, the transport workers, the factory workers, they kept the country on its feet. And as we exit this crisis, what are we doing for them? So the message of those yellow vest strikers a couple of years ago before the pandemic has still not been had answers to their questions. And so we can't just step over all of that and continue as usual. That's not possible. The economic recovery seems to be online, on track, but it's never the same for everybody. I really do believe we have to be aware that we have strategic challenges to face. And if we do not rise to the challenge and work for men and women, then that yellow vest strike is just an ultimate warning before something happens. I'm a bit optimistic, though. We have to learn lessons, and we have to provide answers that respond to the challenges. Well, Well done. You've spoken within your time, your allotted time. Congratulations for that. That leaves me the time to come back and ask you a question. You said that the answers have to be restoring public finance, industrial sovereignty. Centralism is a corpse that's weighing us down, and that we're going to have to find solutions to those second-line workers and to the yellow vest strikers who have still not had their demands met. So, Augustin de Romanet, you are chairman of Aéroport de Paris Group, and you've worked for the president, you've worked in different ministries. So, this responses in the past have been developed within a framework, and that framework has exploded in recent weeks. We're talking about renewing the Maastricht Agreement, etc. There are limits. Xavier Bertrand is a politician who wants to bring solutions, but can you identify what the limits are, what the boundaries are? I've only got 6 minutes, and I know you're going to whip the mic away from me if I exceed those 6 minutes. I'm going to have to think carefully about my answer. My deep conviction is that the crisis is going to change the conditions of how politics are exercised. The conditions of carrying out politics will change because there is a new relationship with the currency and the problems with public debt. So that's my first message. My second message is that to get through this, we're going to have to reinvent a European project and political action which is not all based on performance, but which is based on results. So for the rest, if you want to hear anything else, you can just leave the room, because that's all I'm going to talk about today. So we thought a year ago that there would be no world after the crisis, but now we notice there is going to be a world after COVID, simply because before COVID we knew all the demographic challenges, the inequality, the ecological transition. COVID has amplified the situation because, well, we have the Western states that have given priority to human life rather than the economy. This is unbelievable. Probably the answer is because deep down politicians knew that they would be able to use the methods of the 2008-2012 crisis. Politicians knew that we can save lives by halting the economy. But when you do the sums at the end of the day, someone said to me yesterday, for every life we saved in COVID, we probably killed 5 or 10 people who couldn't be cared for in hospitals for other illnesses. So we did this because we could create currency without any restrictions. So politicians felt that it was their duty to compensate for the economy halting. And the worse the economy was doing, the better they felt they were saving human lives. Let me take some figures here. We spent, between 2020 and 22, 420 billion to compensate a drop in GDP of 8%, which is only 200 billion. So that means we overfinanced twofold the impact of the economic crisis. And so the question of public finance is going to be at the very heart of everything in the years to come. Let me take one figure from Charles Duploche. If we want to get back to the 60% deficit compared to GDP by 2051, we will have the primary excess of 3.5% for the next 30 years. So the question which Enrico Letta put on the table is key. So the challenge of public debt is all the more important because in the United States, as you know, there is a theory whereby all American leaders say they're not adopting it, but I think it's in their minds. If anyone is here is student, read the Myth of the Deficit book. Stephanie Kelton has written that, a very influential economist. And that person has written that you can make as much deficit as you like as long as there's unemployment. The only limit is inflation. And the United States are in a privileged position because here in Europe, well, Greece can become bankrupt. In the United States, the federal state cannot be bankrupt. So we are going to find ourselves with the United States that has 37% public expenditure compared to their GDP. Today they have room for manoeuvre to increase public expenditure, but here in Europe over the next 10 years we're going to see America, which is overspending, to overstimulate innovation, research, and funding the energy transition. In France, we do not have that margin. In Europe, we are going to see our neighbours, our German neighbours, who are saying that we need to get back to the Maastricht Agreement so each state can be responsible for their own debt. So there is a type of insensitivity to debt today. We've seen that in the Debt Commission, which was headed by Bruno Le Maire and Mr. Castex. We saw 20 economists explain to us that the debt isn't a problem really, because if interest rates are low and if the debt is owned by our residents, we can live with 200% of public debt in terms of GDP. That's all well and good, but our debt is not held by the residents. Our debt has been purchased up to 30% by the Chinese, and interest rates at 0 or -1% will not last forever. So this problem of insensitivity to public debt, in the eyes of the economists, is minor when you take a look at another insensitivity, which is insensitivity to ourselves, we, the French people. How on earth can we possibly bear that the state is asking us to make trillions of savings in our retirement funds when they're spending 10 times that amount to save lives during COVID? It will be difficult to be in public service in the future. We'll be encountering new problems that have never been experienced before. For all of our compatriots, the very notion of taking over control of public debt is like saying a swear word. We have wine growers who have suffered from hailstones. Their crops have been ruined, and there's no money to help them. But no, we need to have money to help everybody. So I'm going to have to wrap up now. My 6 minutes are already up. I would conclude by saying that the politicians are going to have a huge responsibility, and they're going to have a very difficult task. They're going to have to fund research, they're going to have to compensate inequalities, they're going to have to educate, and they're going to have to make budgetary savings, and they're also going to have to contribute to the budgetary fund, the European budgetary fund. How are we going to do this? First of all, we have to find a European path and a collective European project. Between 59 and 89, we had peace. And then the Berlin Wall fell down, and then we had a collective project, which was the euro. But that's all behind us now. It's over. Today, we are going to have to find a new European project. This European project will have to be founded on two notions, i.e. ambition and dignity. Ambition, because we are about to go down into the second division of world economies if we don't do something. And dignity... an author said that the end of the fall of the Berlin Wall was the end of the story, but no, it's not. We really need to focus on dignity. That's what happened with those yellow vest protesters. It was a question of dignity. And finally, and I'm going to wrap up with this, political action must no longer be all about performance levels. That's what Nicoletta was talking about. So our compatriots need not necessarily people who think that words are enough. We have to take action, and that is a huge challenge. So to wrap up, I would say that in these economic meetings, and I would like to thank you for inviting me to be here to share my deep convictions. I have said in the past that we have been in peace for 76 years. France has never experienced such a long period of peace since Louis XV. But today, we're rocketed back in time. A few years ago in Aix-en-Provence, there was a book written by Raphael Simonet, and he was saying that democracy can go bankrupt. And I think we are at a very difficult time when democracy can become bankrupt if we do not manage to overcome these contradictions between a duty to be competitive on the one hand and a duty for co-social cohesion on the other. Thank you very much for listening. You've said such a lot of things there. I would like to highlight your commitment to take control over public expenditure again. That is economics. That could mean austerity. But what are the French waiting for? Jérôme Fourquet is going to tell us about that. He has carried out surveys and asking them about how far they trust politicians. Hello, everybody. Yes, indeed. I've got 5 minutes to talk to you about the lessons we have learned after the IFOP poll at the request of the Cercle des Économistes about this question: has the crisis changed politics? So the answers to that question is no when you look at the stats. The results point to stability in terms of the perception of politics. First of all, the first question is, what image do the French have of their own country? And here, IFOP asks questions that we've been asking for the past 15 to 20 years, and the figures are very stable. As very often is the case, there are contrasted images. They can be quite paradoxical. 78% of the French think, for example, that our country has many plus points and strengths, so we can be reassured by that. But by the same time, the theme of the decline is also very present, and it is shared by 7 out of 10 French people. There are only 53% of the French today who consider their country is a model for other countries. Another interesting element about the image of France is to do with the challenges that politicians are going to face, those who are going to be voted in 2022, and even those who are in positions of responsibility today. 50% of the French say that our country is capable to reform itself. That's 51%. So 49% think it's not possible for us to change the country. That's a drop in 20% when you look at the figure from 20 years ago. And so we have a question of taking control of public finances. We have these very interesting figures which correspond to what we've heard or we've learned from our qualitative surveys, the way that the COVID crisis was managed and the way the 2008 crisis was managed. This really did reinforce French people's idea of economics that can eventually become problematic. So a lot of our fellow citizens think that when politicians want to do something, they can. They can go and find the money when it's needed. They can dip into the till whenever they need to. In 2008, things went very badly, in fact, in the public's eyes, because all of the efforts were directed at saving the banks. This year, the money was injected to save the entire economy, and that was supported by our fellow citizens. The question about how does one react when gradually we are going to bring the life-saving drip out of the arm of the economy. There are certain sectors of business where there are going to be difficulties. So why did you shut down shop? Why did you stop the flow? That's a question we're going to have to answer. There's another question of stability pertaining to confidence and the different levels of politicians and administration. Nobody really has come out glowing of all this, and the hierarchy remains rather intangible. It's dictated by the law of proximity. A local mayor will be supported by 79% of the French, whereas the president, the most distant level, we didn't ask about European confidence, but the French president has the trust of 34% of the French population, which is similar to what the two predecessors had. So this is a very important fact. We note, and Xavier Bertrand was talking about the weight of centralism here in France. This diagnosis is shared also by our citizens here in France. The role of local authorities should be strengthened with action which was deemed to be more efficient during the crisis. You may remember those Kafkaesque debates at the beginning of lockdown to identify whether this beach or another beach in Brittany could be open or had to remain closed to the population. The French said that if there's someone who's to decide whether or not the beach can be open or closed, then it must be the local mayor who decides. So that decision, but instead that decision was taken in the dingy offices of someone stuck in Paris. So the population want local councillors and elected representatives to have their say, and that idea has really increased. The state was there to help out, but its time to react was rather long, and they could have done better. And that is called into question today. So to wrap up, I would just like to talk about the high abstention rate which we had at the most recent regional elections here in France. We see that the COVID crisis really has speeded up and accentuated quite a number of phenomena which were already present in our history and in our DNA, particularly the extremely centralized and presidentialized nature of our institutions. The French have seen that all decisions were taken at the Élysée Palace in Paris. You may have 60 million people in France were waiting for one man to speak and to say whether or not we were going to get out of lockdown. So there's the syndrome of go and get me the boss so I can speak to the boss. This is and the president has been the cornerstone of the different institutions. And when you're focused on that cornerstone, you take your eyes off the local elections and the local levels. So if I were to sum that up, we are continuing a certain number of trends rather than tipping into a world of an afterworld, if you like. So thank you very much for listening. I get the feeling that there's a kind of consensus on the stage here, that the crisis hasn't really changed politics. Perhaps the framework. We have under 10 minutes, so I am going to have to take one question from Christian Saint-Etienne, who is the coordinator here. No, Christian de Boissieu. Excuse me, I said the wrong name there. And one question from the room, two from the room, and then that will be enough. So, Christian de Boissieu, would you like to add a question? I've got two questions for our different panelists. I too have been struck by the convergence of their points of view. You've all said that words are not enough, we have to move into the action phase now. So my question is for anyone who wishes to reply. We're asking for more proximity in all countries and at all levels. So what kind of offering are we putting forward? I want some concrete answers. Second question, the link between producing confidence, re-establishing confidence, and the role of economics in this. I know, Xavier, the different link between performance and confidence. I know Xavier will have something to say about that. My second comment for Augustin. The modern monetary theory is neither monetary nor modern. It's all about budget, which gives rise to the creation of currency. And my question is, how are we going to exit from this crisis? I'm less worried. What I'm worried about for coming years is not inflation, it's the fall in the value of the dollar. I believe that Europe will pay part of that bill for the American recovery plan, which is much stronger than ours, in terms of what happens in the States. If you take a look 40 years ago, when deficit in America went down, the dollar went down, and the euro went up, we are going to be paying part of that bill. Thank you very much. Okay, I saw a lady on the front row who put her hand up for a question. Make short questions, please. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I think that if the crisis is to change politics, should we not enhance the quality of public debate? Should politicians stop painting such a dark picture of France? Because when you compare France with other countries, well, it's not that bad. I would like politicians to say how France has been so exemplary on many fronts. I've got lots of friends abroad, and they are shocked to hear how pessimistic we all are here in France. One final question from the audience. I come from the newspaper La Tribune. In 1 year, we may have a new French president, or it might be the same French president who's re-elected. I've got a question for Mr. Letta and Mr. Bertrand. This is the notion of a relationship to time, which was a wonderful subject at this meeting 3 years ago. Time. What will be the conditions of this relationship to time? This is a question in a forthcoming 5-year presidential mandate. How will time be managed given all of these demands and requirements? And I'm sure that this yellow vest demonstration is not behind us. It will rise up again in the future. That was not a short question. I'll get back to answer the first question about optimism. If you're not optimistic, you don't get into politics. If you do not believe that there is a future and that there is hope, you do not get into politics. You find other ways of becoming involved in life, but you do not do politics. You have to think, you have to ask, you have to act for those who are faring well and those who are not faring well. And so if the messages are all optimistic, then it means you are not connected to reality and you know where that can take you. As far as the relationship to time, I think politicians have difficulty in integrating the long term. So let me be a bit paradoxical here. I think if we want to do things properly, then we need a president to have one single mandate. I really believe that, because at the end of the day, it's very difficult to identify the graph line of general interest and popularity among the population in relation to oneself. There has been no French president has been re-elected without a without being jointly elected with another party. And Christian Boisseau said something interesting earlier on. There's another aspect which is interesting. All 5-year mandates for a long time have been mandates during which there has been a major crisis. There's a new job now. Now we have to be able to anticipate. We have to ward off risks as much as we can. We have to look at the long term. It's perhaps easier for me. I used to be in the insurance business. But we have to be able to anticipate many fields. It's become very important. And today, we see in terms of politics, the choice is either you have to choose your plan of action. I think we will get through if we reinforce society and work. It's not going to be very easy as we exit this crisis. However, it's so essential. We have to show that everything is at the service of the population. The crisis in politics is a crisis of results. If politics stops helping people to make life easier, then there's no point in getting involved in politics. Would you like to wrap up, Enrico Letta? You've got 1 minute. I would just simply like to say to Christian, yes, you are right. Proximity is the key. And it's linked to healthcare and to digital technologies. How can we ensure that, thanks to the transition into digital technology, we can overcome the different cost problems, etc. And how can we ensure that in big questions of medication and healthcare, everything we've experienced in the past 20 years when we've been closing hospitals was disastrous in terms of confidence and in terms of links with the people and what people think. The question of time is so very important. I'd like to say something which goes against the current trends. It was much easier to do politics 30 years ago than it is today. I would just like to give you this simple example. 30 years ago, a politician was on show half an hour a day. The rest of the time, that politician was in the office working. No one was seeing what he was doing, what he was saying, how he behaved. Today, a politician is on show 24 hours a day. Everybody sees everything they do, think and see. And I can promise you that it is very difficult, because it creates a situation whereby you are not in a position to manage your time when you're on show, and the rest of the time when you're not on show. You are always on show, because you go into the street, there's someone there who's going to take a photo or film you. You say something, there's someone there who's recording your voice. And I would just like to add that there's one thing, and this is I'm saying to the journalists, if there's an event, there's always going to be a journalist who's going to ask you what you think about it. You don't even know what they're talking about, and you're supposed to be able to respond on the spot in an intelligent manner. So the essential question for our lives today, and for a politician, it's such an important question. And this is my conclusion. And so I would like to request diversity. You must have around you people who help you through diversity. I'm against the idea that there is a savior who can do everything, because when there's a journalist who asks you what you think about this, that, or the other, you could be the best savior the world has ever seen, but you're going to say something stupid sooner or later. So has the crisis changed politics? Thank you to all of our panelists for your contributions. I wish you a very fruitful day. Enjoy.